G'day, g'day. Welcome or welcome back. In today's episode, Blackout Bowen strikes again. Chalmers is cooking. Every accusation is actually a confession. And the French president has put a hit out on Candice Owens. All that and more on the Mark Perrotta Show.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Blaster! Welcome to the Mark Perrotta Show.
Before we get into the main stories today, we're going to do some rapid fire news. We're going to dig into some criminal activity. Now, this is a really fun little game if you throw yourself into ChatGPT a little bit. Just Google, show me recent crime. I put it in every other day or so just to see what's happened around the country. And every day, without fail, there's 15 different things that have gone on. And not small stuff either. Like the things that you see on the news pop up because they're headlines. I mean, we heard today that Lauren down in Melbourne obviously got refused bail, which is a surprise, I'll be honest. Everyone was expecting that the Melbourne courts would definitely release her on bail for the 4,000th time. But no, the judge stood firm and the judge said you're a threat to the public, finally, which we already knew. But if you're bored, just throw something into ChatGPT and just say, just show me crime that happened in Australia in the last 3 days. And this is the sort of stuff that gets popped out for you. So Mirage News is reporting for 2 different meth drug busts. One at Canberra to Sydney Airport. A 19-year-old man was charged after allegedly importing 16 kilograms of meth hidden in packaging intercepted at Sydney Airport. Another one is a huge meth import seizure in Melbourne. On the 25th of November, 2 22-year-old New Zealand women were charged over the importation of 36 kilograms of meth into a Melbourne airport. This is part of a string of cartel-related crimes from a group called Narco Submarines. Over the last 12 months, officials have unearthed an illicit drug flow which remains enormous, and teen recruitment via social media is rising. There's been a daytime gang attack in Sydney. A delivery driver was robbed in daylight in Penrith, ambushed by a gang on motorbikes. A 16-year-old boy was arrested. An elderly driver has been charged over the hit and run of a 6-year-old. An 84-year-old Victorian woman has been charged over a March 2025 hit and run that killed a 6-year-old boy walking to his school bus stop. And in New South Wales this week, we learnt about a 17-year-old boy who was stabbed in the leg and unfortunately died as a result of 2 15-year-olds in masks stabbing him in a park. Police have described the attack as unprovoked, with witnesses reporting that the attackers were wearing balaclavas. The incident has stunned the local community. The accused youths were denied bail and will remain in custody. Authorities are investigating whether robbery or another motive were involved. I wonder how they can say that it's a unprovoked attack, but there might have been a motive. A little bit strange. Now, mind you, the 2 boys were 15 years old. So, what 15-year-old is going around stabbing people? Where are these kids' parents? I mean, we've got a social media ban that's coming in, and that sort of links in a little bit. And this social media ban is somehow supposed to, allow kids to be outside more, but 15-year-olds are also now going around stabbing people in the leg, killing them in a park. Now, it's not all doom and gloom. 2 15-year-olds have just filed a motion in the High Court of Australia. So this is Noah Jones and Macy Nayland will front a challenge with a group claiming the law trespasses on the constitutional right of freedom of political communication and is therefore unlawful. So this is in response to the under 16 social media ban. Now, the dichotomy between those 2 groups of people is rather interesting to me because obviously you have 15-year-olds, 2 15-year-olds who are stabbing a 17-year-old in a park, more than likely over some sort of robbery or some sort of brazen act of, coming of age somehow. And then you've got these other 15-year-olds who are out here posting up legal rights and legal fights for the good of under 16s. I mean, this isn't going to work. The government just spent potentially between $10,000 and $25,000 a day for a barrister to essentially stop a woman from reclaiming her name after she was lied about in a suit from federal parliament. Government basically covering its own backside. And so they'll fight this off and they'll more than likely win. Outside of crime, we've also heard recently that the public services budget cuts are underway. Now, the public services budget, at least the employee numbers since the Albanese government came into power, has risen by approximately 30 to 40%. So that's an additional 34,000 staff members, which was back then about 150,000 people, now creeping up on 200,000 people. Now, why is this interesting? This is interesting because when you actually class people as public services internally and you bring the customers in instead of leasing things out to private businesses, you can actually bend the way that it looks on paper. And so it might look like you're saving money, but in essence, you're actually not. You're actually spending a whole lot more than you ever were before. This also comes as the government has decided to increase its spending when it comes to finding tenders, booking in new business, and picking the right people to actually get a job done. So instead of going out and getting a job done and potentially having to, mitigate for exception as things go along, they are now consistently spending more time trying to figure out if a company is right for the job than actually getting the job done to begin with. Now, the issue with this, and you see this across the public sector, but you also see this in the private sector, is that if you go for perfection, you're effectively going to never get anything done. You have to aim for 80 to 90% and then treat everything else as exception. And so this is why we're starting to see the budget start to just absolutely skyrocket. And we'll get into this a little bit later with Jim Chalmers, the cooker. Immigration and mass migration are under scrutiny. According to the Institute of Public Affairs commentary, Australia is undergoing one of the largest peacetime mass migration experiments in history. The increase in net overseas migration since the pandemic is reportedly far beyond historical norms. You have to go back to approximately post-World War II to get matching numbers. The article suggests serious social and cultural consequences central to Australia's future identity and cohesion. That is according to the IPA. There have been calls for a new national anti-racism framework. This is coming from the same sort of group of people who constantly go on, and when they address the media, they'll come out and they'll say white people in this country, Europeans in this country, British colonizers in this country. Like, if white Australians were to use the same language that is used by these individuals, we would likely be in jail. Just flip those statements. So, anti-net racism framework coming in more than likely as a consequence of the NSN coming up and deciding to be a little bit more public than they normally are. And mind you, they already deported someone. There was a immigrant who beat the living hell out of his girlfriend over in Queensland who didn't get deported because he didn't reach the full 1 year. He was given parole, basically, straight off the bat. Never got convicted of over 1 year, so he wasn't deported. But the guy who came out and said some mean stuff from South Africa, he got deported straight away, and it's a huge moral victory. Unfortunately, making these sorts of little please-dos is kind of essential. I enjoy doing it just for the fun of it, but at the same time, if you want to get a message out, you need the people in your community to just comment, like, subscribe, all of the normal jargon, right? Please just take a moment and give me a hand. We need to create a culture of commentary together. And I love the messages coming in my DMs. Put it in the comments section so that everyone else can see it too. Thank you. Question time might be my least favourite part of Australian politics today. It is undoubtedly a sham. Now, when I was in high school, we got the privilege to go to Parliament House, and we actually got to sort of mimic what it would be like to be in question time. And it was, question and answer, and you give a little speech and someone rebuts. It was basically like an informal debate. What question time has become is effectively just Clip City. It is the shadow government asking questions to the government asking questions to the shadow government. No one answers questions. Everyone just yells at each other. It's a bunch of kids all yelling. The speaker sits at the top and effectively sits there with his head in his hands the whole time saying, guys, we need some quiet, please, guys. I'm going to have to send you to the principal's office. This is meant to be the beacon of democracy, right? Conversation, questions, figure out what went well, figure out what went poorly, figure out how we can move on. Hey, do we like that portion of the bill? Did that actually go down as well as we thought it would? No, it probably didn't go down as well as we thought it would. Giving people 5% deposits has increased inflation, increased house prices, and undoubtedly probably ruined the housing market for the next 20 years. Nah, what it's become is just people screaming at each other. Now, the only beacon of light in this whole thing is the lights went out, right? And you do get some funny stuff out of it, right? I mean, you can see even on the speaker's face who looks like he's probably a pretty cool bloke, but in Parliament he's got to play mum and stop these people from screaming at each other. And it's not. This isn't even partisan. This isn't one side's better at it and one side's worse at it. They're all as bad as each other. They're all a bunch of clowns. They're all a bunch of theatre kids sitting in a room pretending like they're doing something, and not a single question is ever answered. I listened to the whole thing today, the whole thing, and it was moronic. And I can't imagine that any other day is much better. I listen in from time to time, but honestly, it just makes me wonder if there's any point of doing anything in Australia anymore. It is one of the most disheartening parts of our political system. Well, we might as well have a look. We'll have a look at Chris Bowen. So Chris Bowen, it's the second time that the lights have gone out in Parliament House. Now, this one technically probably wasn't his fault. There was an insane storm that blew through Canberra at about the time that he was in Chambers. He didn't come to question time on Monday because he was flying in from COP30. But in this instance, he was there, and so everyone had a laugh when the lights went out. Even the speaker had to have a little giggle. Let's listen to this one.
Blackout Bowen, they call him, the bloke whose efforts are pushing power prices up and threatening to put the lights out. And then, like a message from the heavens, the Parliament went dark.
Pensioners has said.
Members on my left will cease interjecting. Members on my left. Order. Members on my left. Order. No.
The opposition had plenty of fun with the torches on their phones, and there was much frivolity about our national energy self-harm. But Bowen was pretty touchy about claims that his new United Nations role as the COP president for climate negotiations will take up too much of his time, as he protested that it's always been a part-time job.
All cabinet ministers who were COP presidents. Now, what cultural cringe that somehow they can all do it, but Australia can't? I mean, what we want is more influence for our country. They want less. They want less influence for Australia. How unpatriotic can you be? Why don't you want your country to have a bigger role in the world? Why are you so anti-Australian?
I can answer that question since you won't get an answer to it. Why is it a problem? One, you're doing it for another country. Okay, you are the president of the committee or the president of COP31 for another country. How is Australia getting any influence from this? This is generally a family-friendly show, but we're literally turkeys, BITCH in this, right? I'll keep it family-friendly. We are literally doing their work for them. You are going to have to fly there to do this job. You are going to have to be there regularly to get this done, which means you're not going to be here in Australia. Now, mind you, we spoke about this on Tuesday's show, and it was the Bureau of Meteorology had a plan to update its website because the website barely works. Suddenly, out of nowhere today, on a day that we weren't meant to have any crazy storms, we had an insane storm blow over. Now, the first warning of this came through at, I think it was at about 12:01 that we started really hearing about it, coming in from basically the central the central west and just flooding through and then up to the mid-north coast. It hit Penrith at about 12:30, and I thought to myself, why don't I just go on the BOM website and I'll see what's going on. They had a note released at 12:46 p.m., which was a warning that there was storms hitting Western Sydney. Inside of the notation, it said, approximately at 12:45, this storm will hit. So a minute after the storm had hit Penrith, they released a warning saying that it will likely hit Penrith while it was already hitting Penrith. This guy is our climate minister. He's just flown back from COP30. He will be flying in and out of Turkey for presumably the next year, acting as president, pretending like he's bringing influence for Australia, when really he's just being the puppet for the influence that Turkey has garnered. We already spoke about this, but how much influence does Australia have when we lose out to Turkey on a bid for COP31, when we are currently spending more than any other country on earth to go green? And not go green in a smart way. He goes on in this to effectively say, look at all these countries that came out and they're also doing, green energy. They're all doing nuclear. Every single one of them is doing nuclear or buying nuclear from other countries. All the European nations that are using wind and solar are effectively buying their power from France. And this will tie us into Candice. Buying their energy from France, who has nuclear power to the nines. South Korea is investing in nuclear power now as well. And these are the only real nations that he brings up as examples. There's 86 odd, but the rest of them are all so small that they're not worth bringing up. So all of these central nations are now buying from France. And let's tie this into Candice, because I don't want the Candice piece to be too long. Effectively, what has happened is that Candice has been warned by an official inside of the French Parliament or the French government that President Macron has put out a hit on Candice Owens. Now, this seems like social media flair. It's coming out on Candice, who has been the conspiracy theorist of the decade. This is really bad. Really bad. I mean, everything actually points to this being quite true. There's documents coming out everywhere. There's evidence coming out everywhere. The US government is now involved heavily in this. If President Macron has seriously put out a hit for what seems to be about $1.5 million, that's where I'm a bit skeptical. $1.5 million is not a lot of money to take someone like Candice out. Like $1.5 million is like a hit in Australia for like a low-level drug crime. 1.5 mil seems ludicrous. Now, this might be one of several payments, but we're talking about taking out the biggest podcaster in the world. $1.5 million won't even get you the equipment and the people that you need to get this completed. Now, I'm sure Candice has some sort of security. It probably won't be minimal. She's had threats against her for years. I mean, she's been speaking about Israel now for almost 18 months. And Israel has one of the greatest assassination squads in the world. What does the United States do when a hit has been placed on one of its citizens by a foreign government? Now, there is no love lost between Donald Trump and France. Donald Trump has effectively been, peeing all over the French government for a very, very long time. France has done nothing to quell the issues in their region. At every turn, these people have effectively insulted him. Is this the excuse that he needs to do something about it? Now, we heard very early on in the piece from Caroline Levitt that France had better do well to remember that the only reason that France is not speaking German right now is because of the United States. Now, everything is cyclical. Right? Big assassinations happen. And when big assassinations happen, things tend to go south. Candice has linked France's involvement into Charlie Kirk's murder now. And that wouldn't surprise me too much, but it also seems rather insane as well. The idea that France would put a hit on Charlie Kirk because Charlie Kirk called for 300% tariffs on France seems a little bit minor. Now, what Candice has been doing, effectively insulting the president and his wife for the last 12 months. That does actually seem like something that the president will put a hit out for. I don't see how France survives if this is real. Macron definitely won't. If Macron doesn't get taken out by his own people, chances are he'll be taken out by Donald Trump himself, the government acting on his behalf. It won't be motorists, it'll be political. But he will not survive that. So it's getting a lot of press at the moment, but it's sort of like reality TV press, which is probably good for an actual investigation, but it is not good because people are not realizing the severity of this. France and America in open conflict over the potential assassination of a US citizen is not a good thing. Now, Donald Trump does not want to go to war. You know that for a fact. He definitely will not go to war with France. But the idea of taking out the president and causing political instability in the nation that is almost one of the only countries in that region at this point that is economically doing okay. Germany and France are the only two that are still surviving at this point. And France is on a steep decline. Britain isn't in the EU anymore, but it's also on a steep decline. So I'll see how that one goes. I don't see it going well. Honestly, I mean, the money seems like it's been traced. There are people who I listen to and who I trust who have come out and said that this is pretty much 100% real. And so we'll see how that goes. I don't think it's gonna be good. I don't think it's been good. And it adds credence to what Candice has been saying as well, which is also not a good thing. And this is the problem. This is the problem with people who, who insinuate as much as Candice does. She might be right about, it's like Alex Jones. You might be right about 2 to 5% of all the things that you ever say. But that 2 to 5%, they're generally not small things. Now, I personally still do not believe that Charlie Kirk's assassination was anything more than what we know so far. There are hints to me that potentially it could have been more, considering the fact that this kid was so straight shot. Maybe he was trained by someone. Maybe there was some sort of involvement previously and he was an asset that was, woken up from a foreign government of some sort. But that sort of stuff generally leaves a trail. And the way that people have been digging into this, we would have found it by now. Candice has jumped left, right, center, upside down, inside out. It was the feds, right? She didn't say it, but she accidentally insinuated that it was probably TPUSA itself, which pointed towards Erica Kirk because she's now the new CEO. And when she said the new leadership, I'm sure she was meaning Andrew Colvett and that crew, Mike McCoy, etc. And so she's jumped left, right, center. She's basically insinuated that it could have been anyone at this point. Now, France was never on the radar from what I understand it, but now she believes that it is France. Egypt was involved for a while with the Egyptian planes. That was the latest one. And so now she's hit on France. I'm sure there'll be some connection that she'll make to insinuate that she knew all along. And that's where it was getting to if it does turn out. But the issue with these people is that when you lend credence to them by taking them seriously through actions like this, is that you end up turning them, one, into martyrs. She's not even gone, but she's technically a martyr now. And the other issue that you find as well is that you tend to make them seem far more legitimate than they ever actually were. If the Macrons had just stayed silent and never actually said anything, literally not replied at all to anything that Candice had ever said, it would have been boring and people would have just moved on. All the replies that they've done, the suits that they've put together, people who are not guilty technically do not reply to this sort of stuff. Okay, and if they do, it's very specific and they make it very clear cut, You show evidence, you're stupid if the voice is big enough. A hit like this is beyond the pale of guilty now until proven innocent. On all counts. Donald Trump could say that, they're the reason that the Ukraine war started tomorrow. And they would be guilty until proven innocent if this payment turns out to be true. So we'll see how that goes. But let's get into, speaking of people who cook up a storm, let's get into Chalmers. We're going to kick off with a clip from Sky News, and then we're going to throw straight into Jimbo Chalmers. Now, Jimbo Chalmers has been effectively cooking the books. Now, they say every single accusation, or most accusations, are generally a confession. Okay, and so when Jim Chalmers continuously uses the phrase, crackpots and cookers, it made me think. I was like, what? And we spoke about this again on Tuesday. A $90 billion slush fund that is off the budget, so that is hiding away. That is approximately just under 10% of our annual spend per year. And so let's just listen to this clip and then we'll throw into some of the other ways that this government has been effectively hiding their money.
Spending. They're spending money on these energy rebates. They're spending money hand over fist on home batteries and other subsidies. So there's just more and more taxpayers' money going out of the door. When it comes to these rebates, which of course have given some price relief to consumers, do you expect Labor to keep them going? And would you oppose them keeping them going? They're due to run out at the end of this year.
Chris, to be honest, I don't know if they will. I think that there's been enough problems in the entire energy system where they can just put rebate after rebate, but they know that it's not solving the problem at its source. And so, but they might surprise us. Maybe they will come out with more rebates to help households. There's no doubt we want to see households helped. But the reality is this is just going to keep on coming. You have to keep using taxpayers' money. They take more money out of the back pocket and they put a little bit more in your front pocket, and they want to be patted on the back as if to say, thank you very much, job well done.
Now that's Ted O'Brien, who's the shadow treasurer, and he's 100% correct there. But not only is he correct on that, he's correct even probably more than he even knows. Probably not. I'm not a treasurer. And economics I was actually okay at. Accounting, not as much, but I'm trying to get more into it because where you can hide money is insane. Insane. And so you think that everything that the government spends is tracked and you can look at it and you can find it, and technically that's true. All the money that exists, it's listed there. But how do they list it? Where do they get the money from? What is classed as an expense? What is classed as asset? What is classed as an investment? What is classed as, just social security? It's sunk money, right? What's the money that just goes out and will never come back in? And we understand that the government is not a business, but it ought to be run similar to a business, right? In the way that it should be making money for the people. It should be making assets for the people. And at the end of the day, it should be at a net positive, not a net negative. So you can understand deficit spending for high investment, right? I mean, China runs a surplus government mostly because they're debt heavy. But if they didn't have all of the debt that they currently carry coming in, they would be in extreme deficit because they invest like crazy. But there are outcomes for that investment, right? So they actually get an asset that comes out of that. And so I broke things down into a 5-piece how the government hides money. Now, we already spoke about the first one, which is this $90 billion shadow budget, which is effectively, it's outside of the normal budgetary funding mechanism that the government can use, which is essentially like an equity claim that sits outside. So it's loaned money that sits within another body of the government without it being sitting within the national treasury. So it's classed as sort of like Enron style accounting. So you hide the costs under different columns, and then you can brag that you've actually got a surplus instead of the fact that you've got a deficit. It's like having it's like having two accounts, right? It's having two account, and all of your spending comes out of account A, but you've also got a hidden account here where you do all of your gambling. And all of your gambling comes out of this account. You're actually negative $10,000 over here, but over here you've got $2,000, so you feel like you're doing okay. And no one sees this account. The other big one, as I sort of just hinted at before, is calling equity on something that is not equity. So that is putting money into an investment and claiming it as an asset before you actually have any asset backed behind it. So that goes into housing funds, infrastructure funds, renewable energy corporations, and NBN-style entities. It's actually really interesting when you look at the deficit spend that Australia has gone through recently and when our deficit started. The NBN kicks off, and straight after the NBN kicks off, we've been in deficit pretty much ever since, except for those 2 years straight after COVID, where everyone just went out and spent all of their money. And so the economy just went bonkers. There was still very low cost because the government wasn't spending as much as it generally does because things were still sort of starting to open up. And simultaneously, you had the massive drop in government spending as a result of the removal of the benefits that people were getting as to stay at home and work from home. The biggest one that I found on this in terms of hiding equity was this one. So the Housing Future Fund was a fund that was put together that was effectively meant to ensure that there was sort of 30,000 homes built. Now, what the government did is that money that it spent was listed instantly as an asset. And once it was listed as an asset, it does not come out as an expenditure. But for the first 2 years, which was the first 2 years of the Labor government, right, where they were bragging about deficits, about a surplus. And in that time, they classed that as an asset, but nothing had actually been built yet. There was no asset there. And so there were no homes. They had spent the money, but there was nothing to show for it. The third way that they can do it is hiding debt in government corporations. And so this is effectively the government owns a corporation or a company, like the Snowy Hydro, the Rewiring the Nation scheme, the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, and major transmission projects. And because these bodies sit outside of the government, they do not get classed into the government's books. So they can sink money into these programs. If they fail, it doesn't pop up on their budget. And so it's, again, classed in as an asset. But once that asset fails, because it's a separate entity to the government, they don't actually have to class that as a loss on their actual books. And we spoke about Snowy Hydro. Snowy Hydro now is going to cost the government approximately $20 billion instead of the initial $2 billion that was touted by the Liberal government. So that might have been underreporting from the Liberal government or just insane mismanagement from Labor. But either way, that $18 billion is not going to show up anywhere on the major books. Manipulating the underlying cash balance. The headline number that the government uses is always the underlying cash balance. So that's the number that they always put up on the underlying cash balance. We've delivered a surplus on the underlying cash balance, or we're very responsible at managing our cash flow. The issue with this is that the underlying cash balance excludes everything that is shoved off the budget. So this is how you're able to get these off-budget accounts. It's the idea that, and anyone who's done any sort of economics or owns a house or anything like that understands this. You can be cash poor, right, or cash rich at any one time, but be asset poor or asset rich, right? And that means that you might own a home that is worth $800,000 with a mortgage on that of approximately $400,000. So you've got $400,000 basically sitting there. By the time the government takes its cut, it's more like $250,000. $250,000 in there. But in your main bank account, you've got like $1,000 to actually spend because you're spending all your money on taking down the mortgage. But if you were to sell tomorrow, you'd have $250,000 just, to play around with. And so the government is able to effectively say, hey, we've got really, really good cash flow, but we've got this massive credit debt over here that is not being listed because it's not part of our main account. Similar to what we spoke about earlier, where you've got those two accounts, one for your gambling, one for your expenses that everyone sees. And the other major one is the timing. Okay, so it's when do they report certain costs and certain expenditures. So a couple of examples of this would be they bring forward the corporate tax prepayments, or they'll delay NDIS spending. They defer the energy rebates or pause the energy rebates so that it looks like they're actually saving that $75 per household that they've done so nicely for us. or they'll shift infrastructure payments outside of the estimates for the next financial year or for this financial year, depending on where they want to look good or not look good. And we've also spoken about this in a couple of episodes now, where in essence what every government does, and it's the reason I don't like the 3-year cycle, is because you basically get 1 year of them blaming the government that came before. You get 1 year to do things, but no one ever actually does anything. And then they'll try and get stuff done in the last 6 months right before an election, so it looks like they've got things done. But what mostly ends up happening is that they end up proposing new policies for the next time that they get in government, which hopefully, and that is a benefit to having longer terms, but it's also a reason that I wasn't too mad when Labor won, because at least you get some continuity. And with that continuity comes a little bit more, hey, we can actually get things across the line. Because if you don't have that, you've just got someone coming in for 3 years and then they're gone, and there's leadership spills these days, and the leaders disappeared, the vision changes, and there's no structure around what's going on. You end up getting yourself really lost and you can't actually get anything done. And so it's technically a benefit that Labor won to an extent in terms of getting across the line some policies that they've been working on. But they're the five major ones that I've been able to find, and Jim Chalmers has really done a good job of this. So if you heard in that clip, inflation is up 3.8%, but the baseline one that they tend to use, it's sitting between 3.2 and 3.4%. The happy medium is between 2% and 3% for inflation. So inflation just means average annual growth of or increasing cost across a year. It's what your CPI is backed against. It's why most people will say, oh, I got my CPI increase of 3% this year or 2.5% this year, etc. The major issue that we've found recently, specifically within the private sector, because the public sector tends to get their CPI increases pretty readily, there's no issue with that. The money keeps flowing in from the taxpayers. But from the private sector, because revenues are so low, contract bids are so low, as we spoke about last episode, China's buying up all of our contracts, and private contracts in Australia are not actually getting picked up by Australian companies. They're getting picked up by international conglomerates. There's so little money flowing around that a lot of private businesses have not been able to increase CPI at the rate that CPI has increased. Obviously, there's a COVID element to that as well that has touched in, so it's not just Labor's fault. But the mismanagement since COVID has been seriously problematic in trying to get the real wages of people within the private sector back up to a happy medium. And that sort of thing can't be dictated by public mandates. Like that sort of stuff happens through unions, etc. But unions take so long that by the time that you would have taken the 1.5% increase, and then you end up getting the 2.1% increase that the unions have fought for, you might as well have just taken the 1.5, because the increase that you're going to get from that is not going to be felt by you for like 30 years. And so there is no real mechanism for that. It is all just free market trade. But the Australian government is stifling the free market so much by introducing, we just heard 34% increase in professional services and public services sector, by stifling jobs into just the public sector, not increasing real investment, and mitigating the ability for private companies to be able to actually compete within the market and grow, because they feel that capitalism is some sort of dangerous terror. All of those factors are going to play into the cost of living crisis. And that's where we are today. On top of that, obviously, Chris Bowen deciding to go full, helter-skelter on green energy, and not the intelligent green energy, the green energy that is... I'd love to see actually how many wind turbines got destroyed in this blast that just went through, or damaged and now need to be repaired, and what's the cost. And there was a guy that came out with a post recently, and he was showing a graph of all the countries that have green energy. So that's wind and solar energy, and the cost of that energy. Every single one of the countries that has over 50% green energy were in the top right-hand corner of this graph, where green energy is at its highest and cost is at its highest. And all the countries that do coal, just coal, gas, etc., all sitting down the very, very bottom. And then there's sort of like a happy medium sitting in around here, where people have a bit of nuclear, a bit of wind, a bit of solar, and a whole lot of coal and a whole lot of gas. That really is the backbone of how they're meant to work. And so I do seriously believe that Jim Chalmers is cooking the books to the nth degree. We can't be feeling the pressures that we're feeling today with the happy-go-lucky attitude that old mate's putting forward. And that's another thing. So I looked into that 20% HEX debt rebate that they put together. And again, I benefit from that because I have a HEX debt, right? I wish I didn't. And I'll tell you why. Because the way that it actually is going to work is that all it's going to do is smooth over the books for the Labor government. That money is going to come out of the sunk funds that they likely had insured under another company. And they're effectively giving a rebate to everyone for the people who never paid their bill. And so the government is taking a sunk fund cost of approximately, it's generally around between 60 and 70%, which means that they'll be paying a third party to effectively take on that debt. And then the government will pay 60 to 70% or get paid 60 to 70% of the loan while the other company takes on the remainder, and they'll chase up the funds somehow or another. Something like 15 to 25% of all HEX debts will not be paid. Now, it's a consequence of a few things. One, a plurality of women who are in university who will effectively never actually pay it off because they decide to become mothers and they don't get jobs, etc., which isn't a bad thing. It's a bad thing that they actually had to go out and get a HEX degree or a HEX debt before they went out and became, mothers and wives and realized that they didn't want to spend every day of their lives 9 to 5 working at a desk in a city that they have to travel to and from 4 hours a day, sitting next to stinking, sweating men all the way there and all the way back home. Like 5 o'clock in the morning and people like stink like hell on a train. Imagine what they smell like on the way home at like 6 p.m. at night. That's the one thing. The other one is the ridiculous degrees that people are getting as well. So just ludicrous degrees that people are pushing, allowing themselves to go and get. And this was one thing that I think it was Tony Abbott was trying to implement. And it was that only degrees that make you money are allowed to get HEX debt. Anything outside of that cannot be classed as an undergrad. So if you're going to go get a philosophy degree, unless it's paired obviously with teaching or something like that, if you're just going to get a philosophy degree of some sort, you can't get a HEX debt because you're never going to get a job that pays you enough to pay that off. Like, imagine going out and saying, hey, bank, please give me a loan and I will never use it. I'm going to go and I'm going to read this book for the next 4 years. And at the end of that, I'm going to give that book back or probably sell it somewhere. And I'm not going to give you any money for anything that I did, but I'm going to use all that money that you gave me somehow or another. And then someone else is going to pay for 60% of it because the government already pays for, they pay for about 60% on top. So what your actual debt is already subsidized by the government to the tune of 50, 60%. So when you actually think about it, the government is now effectively going to be paying for about 75% of most education in an already inflated system that does not work. There are some that are good, but most of the ones that are good because they're hungry. They don't walk into the place having any understanding of how to do stuff. They walk into a place and they've just, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm so lost. They take sick days every 5.5 seconds. There's not a chance in hell that they're actually competent enough to just be ready on the job. This is where private business needs to get involved and just do, hey, straight out of high school, come to us. We do on-the-job training. You've got 1 year where you're going to be working, 10 to 12-hour days. 6 hours of that is going to be work for us. And then we're going to pay for education. You're going to take a stifled pay package. It's going to be 60% of what you'd earn. If you earn, if the course that we've designed for you, you earn a grade of 50%, you're going to get up to 60% or 70% of the package for that role. If you get up to 80%, hey, you're going to get 80% of it. If you get up to 90%, you're going to get 90% of it. If you're 90 plus, you'll get up to full 100%. If you graduate with some sort of honors, you're going to get straight put into 100%. And then we'll base it based on your work rate as well, see where we can fit you into the company. And in that way, private companies don't have to wait an extra 4 years for kids to be brainwashed into terrible decisions and terrible ways of working. And they get kids straight out of high school who are actually ready to leave school and pretend like they're adults. And in that time, they're able to train these people up. And it's only a 1 year course because it's very site specific. right? It's for that job specifically. And then from there, they can jump to another part of the business or jump to another company or, find their way from there. And the company can give certificates. We vouch this person got this grade on this test and they were very competent. This is their workload, etc. Much better system. It's how it should work. I'm sure there'll be companies that do it. It won't be easy, but I think that it would be far more fruitful than the insane people that we're getting today. We're going to finish off with one clip, which is incredible, and I'm not going to comment on it really that much. This potion is not PG. As if you're watching it on TV or something, put it away. Just watch it on your phone because it's not PG in any way, shape, or form. I should have probably given that disclaimer when I did the abortion one, but yeah. This is a movie clip for a super progressive movie by Pauline Hanson, which is coming out in 2026. Have a watch.
Once upon a time in so-called Australia, a culture war tore the nation apart. And somehow, the lefties won. And I should know, I'm the Prime Minister, Albo. This is my land. Good morning, fellow white straight males.
Hey, big boy.
Just as the elders foretold, this is Namageddon.
I'm gay and retarded, Your Honour. I'll allow it.
That's toxic positivity. I'm sorry.
In case you haven't noticed, Pete, I'm black.
Daddy, I don't believe him.
You have to believe him, honey. He's 1/16th Aboriginal. Wait, what if someone sees us?
Let the cookers watch.
Wow, the rainbow serpent. Sounds like a really cool gay snake. It's not a gay snake!
Well, there's that. I don't know what's more offensive, the hijab move or that. I don't know what it does for the political conversation, but it does seem funny. And I'm keen to go watch it. So that's it. I was going to do a comment section, but I'll jump into it on Friday. My new angle that I'm looking for now at the moment as well is... Actually, that's a fun bit of tidbit news. I had a dude from the Daily Wire, like an executive producer from the Daily Wire, follow me on X, which was a whole lot of fun. We had a quick chat. He seems like an awesome bloke. But I will get into a comment section on Friday. I had one of that post just kept going hectic. And then I did another one recently, which was about the NSN, and the amount of comments on that one were insane in terms of their content, not the number. That's it. That's us. That's the end of the show. Please make sure that you like stuff, follow stuff, go look at it on everything, especially for family. Go follow me on YouTube. I'm on X, Instagram. TikTok is where I'm pretty much posting mostly now. It's sort of where I'm getting engagement. And I do have an intention to start going live as well on TikTok myself, just with topics, just to talk about, see who comes on, see who I can have a chat with. And I think that would be really interesting. If you want to join that live as like a moderator or something, let me know. And we can do live conversations with people. It's not all formal debate. You get some decent people, but it's mostly just conversation and people yelling at you. But we'll see how that goes if we can sort of introduce a level of intellectual conversation inside of the Australian political space just from a grassroots level. So, yeah. I'm Mark Protter, and this is the Mark Protter Show. God bless.